can try it. I'm not sure. Otherwise,
Okay, thanks. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to give this talk, and I'm really thrilled, and I appreciate the award that I got yesterday because it is very special for me because I got it from my colleagues, and that's very meaningful because that means, well, I think they liked my work. And I'm really also very thankful because the PhD has always been a group of researchers and seabird people who work with seabirds who support students. So I'm very, very appreciative of that because I was a student when I started coming to the PhD meetings. And now I'm here giving a talk and being able to thank everybody in PhD for all the support. And well, you know, Isla Bacet is hot in the summer during the day, but it may be really, really cold in the beginning of the nesting season, like in April, when at night there's some northwest winds blowing. And that's because of the currents that come from the deep ocean and give that area a very high productivity. So this will be my 40th season in Rasa, hopefully. And I've been learning a lot from the seabirds and also from professors and colleagues and mentors that have been in contact with me during these years. So, let's see. Okay, thanks. Well, one thing which is really important about seabirds for us as human beings is that, well, because they are very important ecosystem components, there are many species, they have different foraging strategies and ways of getting their food and breeding. They're also top predators of the small pelagic fish or forage fish. And for this reason, they're very, very good indicators of what's going on in the ecosystem. So this is, they tell us about the oceanographic conditions and the food availability. And so when we're studying them, we can learn a lot about that. Oh, good. Nope. No, that's fine. I found out where to fish.
okay.
So, what you see here is an old couple of hermit gulls that are just sitting around, not because they cannot breed when food is available, but because they cannot breed. They couldn't breed that season because there was very little food. So they are just sitting there and waiting for the conditions to improve. And when there are not good conditions to breed, they will just guard their territory, in the case of the hermit gulls, and stay there for several weeks before just leaving the area because they have to start migrating to other more productive areas. So they're very, very, they live a long time. Their longevity is very high, and for example, in the case of the albatrosses, it may be close to what human beings live, or even more. So, for example, the penguins have an average lifetime of 20 years. Terns may live over 30 years. Pelicans about 40. Gulls too, and albatrosses are over 70 years or more. So this is a strategy that they have developed over time through selection, and that allows them to become proficient at gathering food, enough not to feed just themselves, but also their chicks when they're going to breed in the future. And also, they are very, very useful. They reach sexual maturity at several years, when they're several years old. And they're also not breeding when the conditions are poor. So they may skip breeding years or breeding seasons because they don't have enough food in their, and the reserves in their bodies are too low to allow the breeding to occur. So, for example, our case study is Isla Raza, which is I don't think the pointer works.
Es la estrellita roja. La estrellita roja.
There's nowhere to start. Okay. Well, this is Isla Raza here in the Gulf of California. And there is where we are performing. Okay, thanks. Okay. Okay, so here it is. So in this whole area, which is called the Mangrove Island area, is situated in a very productive region. And as you can see from this picture here, from this image, there is, the waters are very productive. This image shows the concentration of chlorophyll in the surface water. And so that's one of the reasons why this region, the Mangrove Island region, has many seabird colonies, not only Herman's gulls, 95% of the world population, but also elegant tern. It's about 90% or something like that in normal years. And then there's a huge population of California brown pelicans, one of the largest colonies of blue-footed boobies and brown boobies. And then there's some almost endemic species, which are, for example, the Barbarous murrelet and the yellow-footed gull. So this is a very rich environment. There's many other seabird species. So here, what we found is that the seabird breeding success and breeding effort is linked to the oceanographic conditions. So the Southern Oscillation Index and the sea surface temperature anomaly are very good indicators, and they are closely related to what is happening to the birds. So, for example, in this graph, I show the occurrence of El Niño, and for example, 92 was a very bad year, 98 was a very bad year, and these were characterized by these peaks of temperature anomaly and the dips in the Southern Oscillation Index. Okay. Thanks. Okay. So now, this is, as I was saying in the former slide, you can see the occurrences of the anomaly and the Southern Oscillation Index, peaks and dips. And from there, in the same years, what we saw is that the breeding success, when collapsed to very low levels during these El Niño seasons, 92 and 98. And this is the Southern Oscillation Index. So this is another way of showing the same information. These are the normal years. These are the El Niño years. And they're quite separate from each other as data points. We were also looking at the diet of the seabirds And we started doing that in 85 and 83. And what we noticed is that the birds are feeding on small pelagic fish or forage fish, mainly Pacific sardines. And then they started switching to northern anchovies, and the Pacific sardines started going down from their diet. And they anticipated the reduction of sardine by the fishing fleet. So the fishing fleet was catching sardines for a couple of more years, and the diet of the birds was showing since 1989 that the sardines were going down. The collapse of the fishery occurred in 92. So they were actually predicting what was going to happen. This was only done by us looking at the diet of the elegant tern and carbon skulls. And we were wanting to do corroborate if this information was also reflected in other seabirds. So using Dan Anderson's data of pelicans, we were able to see that the path, that the tendency was very, very similar. For example, here you have the white dots are the fleet catch, and for sardine in the top graph and anchovy here below. So they were doing very similar things, maybe one or two seasons difference, and also because the hermit skulls and elegant terns are feeding on pre-recruits of sardines. They're very smaller fish than what the pelicans are taking, and so the elegant terns and hermit skulls were. That's the reason we think they could. We could use their diet information to predict what the fleet was going to take the following season. And the pelicans, we had to use the same season information to compare with the fleet catch. So that was very interesting. And the graphs of course the physicists would just laugh at our graphs for us biologists, but this is the tendency of what an elegant tern diet, this is the composition or proportion of sardine in the bird's diet, and this is the catch per unit effort of the fishing fleet. So for the elegant tern, which was the highest correlation, we saw that as the proportion of sardine in the tern diet goes down, the catch per unit effort, the fleet doesn't actually notice that until when the sardine is quite low in the diet of the seabird. That happens opposite for the anchovy. So the birds have to be eating a really big proportion of anchovy before the fleet starts catching anchovies. And so this is another type of representation of the same thing. This is the Pacific sardine. If the seabirds are taking 100% sardines, the fleet has a high catch per unit effort, but it's still having a very high catch per unit effort until the very low level of sardine in the diet of the seabirds occurs, and then is when they totally have a crash in the catch, and the opposite for the anchovy. This is called, by the people who study these fisheries phenomena, this is called hyperstability, and this is called hyperstability, and this has another name that I just forgot about. Well, I'll remember. So then this is the reason why the fish are telling us, well, there's very little sardine, and the fishermen are saying there's a lot of sardine. But actually there's very, very few large shoals of sardine because they stick together. The sardines tend to shoal very easily, and I talked with the artisanal fishermen, like the guys who are fishing with skiffs in the area, and I told them, well, we are finding this, and they said, oh yes, that's because the sardines make balls so they gather. They say, oh, se hacen bolita. So they know what is going on. But for some reason the industry, because it's a different type of people, the fishery is different, they have not realized that this is happening, so they keep fishing for sardines when actually there's very, very, very few sardines. And then when the sardine population is very low, then the sardines start mixing together with other small pelagic, like anchovies or mackerels or throatfin herring or others that are in the area. So this is a phenomenon that sort of favors overfishing. And this is a model that a couple of models that we developed to predict total catch and catch per unit effort. And we used a method called jackknifing. And so the black dots are the real catch. And if we use the jackknifing, that means that we use all the data except for 1 year, and then we predict that year's catch. Then we put back the data for that year and take out another the next year and so forth. So using that method, our predictions were very close to reality, as you can see with the dots. The white dots are the ones we use with jackknifing, and they're the ones that are closest to the prediction. So if you can, if this is the graph that shows the catch of the fleet, and they started fishing in 1969, and they are now fishing very little. But when they started, the fleet was very small, and the trips were fewer, and the fishing seasons were smaller, where they were shorter in the year. And they did suffer a little bit from the El Niño years, the anomalies. Until this time, they had a small dip in their catch. But then there was a moment when I think there was overfishing occurring here, and their collapses started becoming larger and larger and larger. For example, here is the 92 collapse. It took them a couple of seasons, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then they recovered. Then the next dip, they took 1, 2, 3, and then they recovered. And then they took 1, 2, 3 seasons, and they started recovering. But from the last collapse, which was in 2009, they have still not recovered. So this is very similar to what is predicted in one of the models, where so this is a model where the fisheries people have noticed that if there is a slight pressure, the dips will be occurring, the little collapses will be occurring, but not huge collapses. Then if the pressure is a little bit larger, there will be some collapses occurring. This is the straight thin line, the continuous line. But then when the pressure is higher, the collapses will be occurring, the fluctuations in the population will be occurring, but the magnitude of the fluctuations will be increasing. And I think this is what is happening to the sardine fishery right now. So there probably should be some reduction of the effort, but up to now there's been no reduction. So one of my students in his thesis was doing some estimates of what is happening with the fishery, and if you take into consideration all these collapses, like tips and then collapse and then tip and collapse, the average catch of the whole period is less than 200,000 metric tons. So there is no point in fishing more than that from, well, of course the fisheries managers should estimate and maybe put a quota on the catch. Because they do get these wonderful peaks, but then they get these very bad dips where the fleet needs to be, well, the boats need to be sold. They have to mortgage the fleet and things like that. So that's not a very good fishing strategy or to sustain some business, I think. So what also using the breeding strategies and the breeding way of the birds, of the seabirds, what do they tell us about what's going on in the environment? So as I was saying, most seabirds present these characteristics. They have high longevity, low fecundity, they lay few eggs and raise few chicks, small clutch sizes, and late sexual maturity. They have a very high adult survival. Once an individual reaches adulthood, their survival is very high, but their mortality when they're chicks, fledglings, and young individuals, immature, is high. They may skip breeding seasons when the conditions are not good for breeding, and they mostly live in very fluctuating environments, so their food availability is very variable. And for example, the Herman's gull is a species that nests almost exclusively in the Gulf of California and in the mid-retirement region, which is very productive. But this is an area that has also, of course, feels the effects of El Niño, and then there is where the food abundance drops. So our hypothesis is that in order to maintain a stable population, the long life cycle of the Herman's gull, as other seabirds, should allow to resist a certain number of breeding failures along its lifetime and recover during the normal years when both marine productivity and the availability of its food is high. So we studied the population of the gulls. We banded in along about 9 years. We were banding about 27,000 fledglings using U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service bands. So from those, we only were able to recite 951 adults, and we recited them several times along their breeding life. So we have about 2,400 resightings. So we examined the survival rates and the fecundity for these individuals, how many chicks they produced, and we worked on a model to see what was going on with that population. So finally, we tested the theoretical frequency of warm anomalies that can induce a sharp population reduction, simulating population growth under different frequencies of El Niño. So, well, this is an example of what we found with the banding program. We found, for example, that the first year of life has a very high mortality rate, and it goes down, and the mortality is reduced the last year for immatures, which is the 3rd to 4th, is quite low compared to the mortality that is happening the first year. And we also found out that the birds were migrating all along this area. This is the most used. Then there's a few that are strays, like in Johnston Atoll, close to Hawaii, and also there's a couple in New Zealand. And the one inland here is in the San Joaquin River, the top, like the birth of the San Joaquin River. So it probably went up river and died there. So this information comes from the Fish and Wildlife Service, band recovery. So in the second set of data, we were looking in the breeding area what the gulls were doing. So we decided to band individuals and follow their breeding success for many, many years until present. So what we found is, for example, that during non-La years, normal years, which is the black dots here, the fecundity of the species increases between ages 4 and 7, and from there on it keeps quite stable with some fluctuation through all the life, the breeding life of the bird. And in the El Niño or anomalous years, the breeding success is very, very, very low. Almost zero sometimes, like in 1998, when they didn't even establish a nesting colony. And the survival, as we were looking at in the previous graphs, also increases from almost 50% to quite high numbers, over 90%, and drops a little bit, but it is still quite high during all the adult life. Then we have very few individuals surviving to these ages, so that's why we have this incredible standard deviations and error. So until the first years, the survival, as we saw before, is very high, and then it goes down after 90 years. So these were quite significantly different. And in the end, what we were able to find is that the population growth, the lambda values under different frequencies of occurrence of El Niño show a gradual but not linear decline as the frequencies of the El Niño increase. So the model predicts that the frequencies of occurrence of El Niño higher than 4 years. So if El Niño occurs every 5, 6, 7, or 8 years, the survival, the lambda is quite high, is about 1. And then if it occurs every 5 years, it's 1. And then if it occurs less than 5 years frequency, the lambda will decrease, so the population will start to drop. And so we corroborated that this longevity of the seabirds have developed as an evolutionary strategy that allows them to keep their fitness in an unpredictable and highly fluctuating environment, which is what we thought we would find, but of course we need to prove it. And then, however, of course, this resilience has limits, and if El Niño conditions or other conditions that promote sea surface temperature, high sea surface temperature conditions, that will result in a reduction of the population. So if the frequencies of these events surpass 3 or more per decade, the population will start to decline. So in the last decade, we have experienced 5 warm events, which is very, very high. And so the population must be starting to decline. And it's hard to see now because there's many cohorts nesting together, and it's hard to distinguish the 4-year-olds from the 25-year-olds. But we will start to see probably this decline pretty soon. The other thing that is interesting and that we recently found through the analyses, genetic analyses of the Herman's gulls, is that their population expansion took many dozens of thousands of years, and our results show that the population expansion of the Herman's gull started about 176,000 years ago, and we started to expand quite a bit until the present. So the other interesting thing is I was interested in looking at what had happened to the prey of the bird. So we found some very interesting work that shows that the Pacific sardine population expansion started, very conditions settled. They start feeding the sardine drops, and they start feeding on northern anchovy. So probably they, when the anchovy was not available yet because its population had not expanded, they would not be able to grow very much as the species, as the population of the species. And then after the northern anchovy also increased, if they didn't have sardines, they would have anchovies in the bad years, so their population would be able to expand continuously because they had either one or the other prey, depending on if the year was normal or if it was a year with temperature positive anomalies. So that is very interesting because it shows us how much dependence there is of the seabirds to their food supply. So, okay, so our conclusion is that if we want to do some conservation of the species, we need to look not only at the conditions of the sites where they are nesting, but also their food supply. And there's some very, very delicate threads that unite all the species in the ecosystem. So the coupling of the seabird populations with those of their forage fish is a process that has taken hundreds of thousands of years. And if we disturb these processes that have taken hundreds of thousands of years to develop, then they will probably hardly re-establish in a short time. Our last research together with Kate Goodenough is putting satellite markers on the birds, on the terns, in this case the elegant tern, and we have been following their migration from the breeding sites to their wintering areas, well, our winter here in the northern hemisphere. And this is a more detailed view of what they do. Last year, some of them lost their chick, so they started moving around. And there's one of the terns which I named Calma because she was very calm when we were putting the radio on. But she was not calm at all because she decided during those months between May and June, she went out to the Pacific, went to visit her friends in LA, and back again into the Gulf of California. And now all of them are in this area. So it will be very interesting to be able to track all these birds. And unfortunately, we lost one of them near the shrimp farms in southern Sonora. So we know they control the birds that are feeding in the shrimp farm. So they probably was killed there. I don't know. Maybe it just fell off. I don't know. But it's something, they're giving us a lot of information, and it's very valuable information also. So thank you very much.